Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about a really interesting situation that has recently developed around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that is in the occupied territory in Ukraine. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that I posted a number of videos talking about this power plant. It's actually been shut down, so it's not operating at the moment. It's not producing any electricity. But obviously, when you've got a nuclear powered facility, you still have all the nuclear reactive material on site. So you need to keep managing it to make sure that it doesn't overheat. You don't want a meltdown, which could then lead to an explosion and the release of radioactive material. And obviously, there is a history of this because the largest explosion that ever took place in Europe was at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which was actually in Ukraine. It's only around about 300 miles away from the Zaporizhzhia plant. And Russia has now said that the external power cables have been cut to the plant, and they are in desperate need of external power because at the moment, the plant is only being cooled by the backup emergency diesel generators. Now, this is potentially building up to be a really serious situation. And just to put into perspective just how large the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is, it's around 50% larger than Chernobyl was. And obviously, Chernobyl, when that went into meltdown and we saw the explosions in the reactors, that caused major problems. And in fact, it's still a no-go area today. And that was back in the 1980s, 1986. And the reason why this power plant needs electricity is for cooling, because you need to keep these reactors cool, because a nuclear reactor generates a huge amount of heat from nuclear fission. And even when it's shut down, the fuel rods keep producing decay heat, around 5 to 10% declining each year. So they're still producing masses of heat. So the water is used firstly to absorb heat from the fuel rods. That heat is then transferred to steam turbines during normal operation. That's how you generate electricity from a nuclear power plant. And it's needed to prevent fuel rods from overheating and from melting. So that's why the water is needed. And if cooling is lost, within a matter of hours, the water will boil away as the reactor pressure rises. And if it's not replenished, then the fuel rods then become exposed and can overheat to more than 1,200 degrees centigrade. The zirconium cladding will react with steam, producing hydrogen gas. And that's what happened in Japan, in Fukushima, when we had an explosion. And the fuel rods can actually melt, leading to a core meltdown. And molten fuel could breach reactor structures, releasing large amounts of radioactivity. And just to put into perspective how serious this situation was, when this plant was designed, it actually had 5 different mainline electricity backup systems. You can see the list here. The first of these was severed in March 2022, so in the first month of the war, during early fighting around the region. The second was lost in the middle of 2022 after repeated shelling and grid damage. The third was also lost around that time. It was disconnected after clashes cut transmission infrastructure. And the fourth, which was the last mainline electricity power, was lost in September, on September the 23rd, during heavy fighting. And it forced the plant onto its emergency diesel generators. Now, there was also a backup line that was provided, but that's been very intermittent since 2022 and is frequently damaged and is totally unreliable. So Russia is now asking for help. It's saying that it needs this power to be restored in order to keep the plant safe and to stop some sort of nuclear meltdown. But from Ukraine's point of view, it's very difficult to be able to repair this power line, even if the Ukrainian authorities wanted to, because there's such heavy fighting that continues to take place in the area around where they would need to work. So we've got a really interesting situation developing here, because if this power plant doesn't have sufficient water to keep all of the reactors cool, then we could get some sort of nuclear incident, some sort of explosion, which would obviously cause a release of radioactive material and would potentially render a lot of this area unusable and uninhabitable. And I think that's quite ironic at a time when Russia is invading to take over the territory in what they say is to protect the people of the area. If there's a release of radioactivity, then clearly nobody will want to be living anywhere in this vicinity. And the Zaporizhzhia power plant is not that far away from Crimea when you look at the map. It could, if there was a major explosion, this could affect lots of areas that Russia is currently occupying. So I think this is a really interesting consequence of the invasion of Ukraine, that this power plant has now lost its supply of electricity that was coming from the grid in Ukraine. And Russia is now asking for help to restore that power. It's trying to set up a mainline electric supply from Russia. However, that hasn't been put into place, and I don't think realistically it's going to anytime soon. So the emergency diesel generators that were set up for that purpose, just for being an emergency, are now the main form of protecting the nuclear power plants. And there is a possibility that we could see some problems occurring if Russia doesn't keep the supply, or they have the problems with those generators. If they don't have enough diesel, or the generators start to fail, then we could see some major issues starting to arise around this power station. So I wanted to post this video really just to make sure you were in the know as to what was happening, because I think we've all forgotten about this power station. It's not operating anymore, so everybody just assumed that it was all fine. It's been decommissioned, but it hasn't, because the radioactive material is still on site. It needs to be protected, it needs to be cooled, and Russia is now struggling because it doesn't have any mainline electricity. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And thank you so much to everyone that's supported me, particularly everybody that's recently signed up on Patreon. Really appreciate that support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.